when I was talking about the stall test on that transmission, whenever you put it in, you block your wheels, you put it in, you lock your park brake, you put it in gear, and you hold the brake as hard as you can, and with your pressure gauge on it. Now you can do your stall test without the pressure gauge on it. And a stall test is basically going to be the point at which the engine can't rev up anymore when you got it in gear and you got a wide open throttle. You know what I mean? In other words, in gear, wide open throttle, brakes locked. You don't want to be spinning wheels. You want everything to be locked down. That's a stall test. You can look in your book. You're going to find a stall speed test spec in there for that. If the stall speed test is low, you either got an underpowered engine, which you can usually tell that. You know what I'm saying? If it's skipping, or if its timing is bad, or if the valve timing is late, or something like that. Or you got the stator in the center of that torque converter is not multiplying torque. So you got a bad torque converter. So if you got low stall speed, here's an example for this. Our shop foreman over there at the Ford place had a Ford Expedition, and it was nearly brand new, and it was skipping, and apparently, you know, had a bad qual pack that was dropping out occasionally. And so we were driving that thing trying to get it to skip. You know, he just set it in there under warranty, and he was the main shop foreman of the shop. And whenever I drove the thing, it seemed to drive fairly normal, and we could not really get it to skip. So what I was going to do is I was going to lock the brakes and brake torque it, you know, which is to see if I could load the engine enough to where I could make it start dropping a cylinder. And when I did that, I noticed that it stalled. In other words, the engine stopped gaining RPM with it in gear, foot on the floor at 1600 RPM. That was too low. So I looked in the book. I went to the shop manual, I looked in the book, and I found out that the stall speed on that particular transmission with that engine and all was supposed to be 2800 RPM. And I told Philip, I says, this engine, it wasn't skipping when it did that either. And I says, we're going to find your bad coil, but you got a bad torque converter. See how quick that is and easy? You know you got a bad torque converter. It's a stall, and I want you to be doing some stall speed stuff. Now you got to make sure you lock the brakes real good and solid so that nothing can move. Yeah, I mean, I don't want you boiling the tires. Don't do that hogwash in there. But and also, because you're shearing all that fluid and everything, you're heating the transmission up real hot, real quick doing that. So basically, you're gonna stall it just long enough to get your the pressure testing we're talking about when you're doing the stall. You're basically going to hook your pressure gauge up, and you're going to have it, you know, where you can see it, and you're going to do that stall in reverse. You're not going to do it in park or neutral. You can't stall it in park or neutral because it's not doing anything. You just rev a motor up that way. You put it in reverse, you do your stall test, you record it. See that? Slow idle, fast idle, whatever. But the wide open throttle, you might notice on your column on your little sheet here, on the transmission pressure testing sheet. You see that right there? All right, there's that little table. And basically, when you fill that out, there are actually specs that are published for what the stall speed pressure is supposed to be. You know, you're looking at your RPM when you're doing your stall speed, you're going to move past that if that's normal, and you're going to go look at your transmission pressures. And if the pressure that you're showing on that gauge, once you write them all down, you're going to need to go find out in your transmission part of your shop manual software what it is that pressure is supposed to be. If the pressure is out of line some kind of way, then you're going to have to find out what's going on. Now, the cool thing about it is you can go in there and look at your little table about which clutches and bands are applied and which solenoids are operating in which gear. And if you've got low stall speed and drive, you see, and you know you're in first gear, then, or you know, I'm not low stall speed, but I mean pressure, low pressure, then you're going to be looking at only the stuff that's actually applied and receiving high pressure in that. And there's actually maps that you've got in your book. It shows you where the pressure is in which range and all that, see. So if you know which clutch to go to in that transmission, if the pressure is low, you're going to say, well, I've probably got some blown seals or a cracked piston in this particular clutch pack. You see, this is you're able to pinpoint. What you're basically doing is you're going to gather as much data as you possibly can before you ever crack into it, basically is what you're doing. Now, typically, a lot of times I've seen people do this thing where they'll jerk the transmission out, put clutches and seals in it, and clean the valves and pop it back in. I got the same problem I started out with because there's an electronic problem. You know what I mean? Now, on Abby's, I noticed that the transmission that we're pulling out of hers, whenever you put hers in gear, it's like it's in two gears at once, and it stalls the engine. You know, I mean, you can kind of keep it going if you'll play with it, but you can't drive that car like that. And the transmission solenoid connector, when I disconnected it from the top of the transmission, and it was sitting there idling. When I disconnected that solenoid connector, it killed the engine. So there's something wrong inside there, probably in the valve body area, and that's the first place we're going to look. When we get that thing on the bench, we're going to pull that cover off, we're going to get the valve body off, and we're going to investigate what's going on in the valve body on there. And I'm not so sure she's got anything wrong on the inside, because when we pull the transmission oil pan, the valve body's on the side of that one, the pan's on the bottom. Pull the transmission oil pan, there was some of that, you know, black stuff that you usually see in a transmission oil pan where it's got a lot of stuff. But there wasn't any metal, there wasn't any parts of clutches or anything like that. So I feel like she's got some kind of a problem with her valve body. And that's where we're heading now. But her and Daniel are just having a whale of a time with that transmission, removal. Okay, let's go. Let's look at this first thing. A stuck pressure regulator valve will show up as fixed line pressure, which means the same pressure all the time. That is the answer to number one. You got that?
Same pressure all the time.
Yeah. In other words, how will the pressures look on a transmission with a stuck pressure regulator valve? Now, the pressure regulator valve is a spring-loaded spool valve, and the pressure that's put out by the pump has got to push against that and squeeze the spring and open a port. And whenever that spring is calibrated just so on some of the newer transmissions, the pressure control is a variable force solenoid, and the more current it applies to that solenoid, it changes the pressure that way. If you disconnect the power from the transmission, that thing defaults to the high pressure. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's going to default to high pressure because you don't want your pressure to be low. We talked about that a little bit last week. If your pressure is low, then you're going to burn things up. If your pressure is high, yeah, it's probably going to shift harden stuff, but you're going to save things. You see where I'm going? If a transmission has normal pressure in park, reverse, and neutral, but low pressure in all forward ranges, what's the probable cause? Somebody find that in that handout. See it? This is giving you a lot of really high quality information on transmission pressure testing. You need to hang on to this handout and keep it for reference. You got me? If it's got normal pressure in park, reverse, and neutral, but has low pressure in all forward ranges, what is the probable cause? Now look at both pages of that thing. What typically is going to make pressure be low anyway? If the pressure is supposed to be going in there and filling up a cavity, and it's supposed to be trapped in there, and then the pressure rises. Let's say that,
leak.
huh?
It'd be a clutch leak.
It'd be an internal leak. You're going to write internal leak on that one. Question number 3 is, when doing a stall test, what precautions should be taken? Well, for one thing, how many of you guys have ever seen a broken motor mount? How it acts when you got a broken motor mount? What does it do?
All motor around.
The engine tries to lift up and all. You don't want to do this when you got broke motor mounts, because you don't want the engine trying to jump out of the car. You know, that thing's got to be mounted good and solid, and you also got to pay attention to the brakes. If you got bad brakes, you don't want to. And I'm telling you something else. It's a good idea when you're doing your stall test to sort of get out there so that nothing's in front of you, or nothing's behind you. So you want to get out there so that if the thing tries to get away from you and it lunges forward about 5 or 6 feet, you're not going to hit anything or anybody. Don't stand in front of the car or behind the car when somebody's doing a stall test.
Now, could you do the whole stall test like if you had it on jacks, or if you...
You can't have it. Well, if you got it on jacks, the wheels are going to try to turn. You just about got to have it on the floor.
Oh, okay.
So you got to have, unless you got a super good park brake that won't let that thing move. Most of the time, you do what I'm talking about. That son of a gun. If you can stand on the brake with both feet and lock the park brake, and on some of them, they're so strong they'll try to move the wheels anyway. But you got to really do some heavy-duty stuff to keep them wheels from turning. You don't want the wheels turning because that's going to mess up your numbers, see? Okay, but just make sure your brakes are working, or you don't have a broken mounts or anything like that. Okay, in which ranges should main line pressure be checked? Main line pressure should be checked in which ranges? Look at your handout. It ain't a very long handout. Look at your table up there at the top. There's going to be every range except what?
Reverse. Park and neutral.
No, you're going to do it in reverse, because reverse pressures are usually a little bit higher than the others. But yeah, park and neutral, that's right. Except park and neutral. You can't really. There's no point in checking the pressure in park or neutral as far as that. If pressures are high at slow idle, what does it indicate? If pressures are high at slow idle, what does that mean? Part of the reason you're in school so you can learn stuff you didn't know before, right? Pressures are high at slow idle. That's question number 6. Anybody see it in there?
It indicates a pressure regulator or throttle pressure problem.
Very good. A pressure regulator or throttle pressure problem. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about throttle pressure. Well, we're going into our throttle. We're wanting to hold the gears longer, and we wanted to shift harder. A throttle valve pressure is basically doing the same job that the old vacuum modulator valve used to do. Low engine vacuum means high engine load. And there's a vacuum line snaking down to this regulator, to this modulator valve. And that modulator valve is going to move another little valve inside the valve body. It's going to hold the pressure. It's going to raise it. Well, basically, governor pressure on your old hydraulic ones. You guys know what the governor is on a transmission?
That's the thing that's on the valve too. No, that's on the motor.
Yeah, you're talking about the engine. The governor is going to be what it tells you that how fast the car is going. It's basically it's usually mounted on the Fords. They had it mounted on the output shaft that back there, the part that's hooked to the drive shaft. On the Chevys, it had a gear that was hooked to the output shaft, and it would spin, and centrifugal force would move some flyweights, and it would cause the little valve to move. And so basically, governor pressure and throttle valve or modulator pressure is pushing back and forth against one another. So if you had low throttle valve pressure or high vacuum, which would be low engine load, the governor is going to be the one that's calling the shots on your shifts. But when you're into the throttle and you're wanting to hold your gears longer, low vacuum or throttle valve pressure that was higher is going to it's going to push against that governor pressure, and it's going to have to the governor is going to have to spin even faster to oppose that and make it shift. And so just think about that. This is an early burn-in, so you guys will get that. All right. I'm in class this time of day, and for some reason everybody wants to call me. I don't know what that is. Okay, now then, keep looking. Everybody got a restricted filter. What you got? A restricted filter will show up as what?
Gradual pressure drop at high RPM.
Gradual pressure drop at higher RPM. See, so as it sucks everything up against that filter, it's going to wind up dropping down. If all pressures at stall are low, what should you do then? It'd be a good idea to memorize this doggone thing.
Pull the TV cable to maximum or disconnect the vacuum line.
Yeah, to see if they normalize, And that's part of your troubleshooting.
Pull the TV cable to maximize or disconnect the vacuum line.
Now that Oldsmobile out there, one of the reasons I like for you to do there's a couple of reasons I like for you to do the pressure test on that Oldsmobile Delta 88, that 97 model, because it's got a vacuum modulator valve on it. And I think it's got a 4T65E transmission in it. But anyway, it's got a vacuum modulator valve on it, and that thing actually, when you pull that vacuum line, you'll see that pressure change, and that's important to know that. Okay, if all your pressures at stall are low, you pull that TV throttle cable. You're trying to raise the pressure by doing that. See, okay. Let's see. If the pressures are low at slow idle. That's basically the third paragraph on the first page. You see that one? If the pressures are low at slow idle.
It indicates a potential problem in the
pump, pressure regulator, low fluid, or internal leakage. How many of you know what it feels like whenever the transmission fluid's low? Give me an example. What happens when the transmission fluid is low?
You get hesitation.
Yeah, what happens is when you put it transmission fluid expands when it warms up. You get in it when you crank it up cold, you put it in gear, and it goes, boom, boom. And it bumps like that. That's the first thing you're going to do there is check and see if your fluid's low. Now the second deal you got, it makes your transmission may not do that. But what if you're driving and you go around a corner and all of a sudden it feels like a transmission dropped to the neutral? You go around a corner and go, oh, boom. Well, you got low fluid in too. Now something else you got to recognize is that if somebody has put the wrong dipstick in there, it may be reading full when it's not. You get me? And you always got to, it's kind of like you got to really do a lot of work to make sure that the fluid level is right. Because if the fluid level is low on these automatic transmissions, they do not act like they're supposed to. And one of the problems that we have, when somebody builds a transmission in here, a lot of times they get it all put back together, they put fluid in it, and they don't actually go through the procedure of making sure everything's full up like they should be by running it through the gears and all, and they'll think it's full of fluid when it's not, and then it'll give trouble going down. Later on you got to add more fluid to it. Okay. Now I'm going to show you this little piece of video here that I made right here in the shop, and it's on my YouTube channel. And this is a line pressure control test. And basically, I'm going to hit the play. It's a real short, it's a minute and 29 seconds. This right here is you're using the scan tool and a pressure gauge on the GMC. And that's what you're going to see right here. And, you know, if you happen to be at the, if you go to my YouTube channel and you type in pressure, you'll come to this particular video. There's only like 4 videos in my channel that have anything to do with pressure. This is one of them. Okay, and that's what you're going to see when you get to that.